Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Infrastructure Monitoring Maturity, Modeling Technology, Process, and Culture. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speakers are Shamus McGillicuddy, Senior Analyst at Enterprise Management Associates, and Scott Frymire, Director of Content Marketing at SevOne. Shamus has more than 9 years of experience in the IT industry, primarily as a journalist covering the network infrastructure market. Prior to SevOne, Scott spent 16 years in marketing business-to-business software and services for ERP solution providers. His primary interest is interpreting how IT trends in the enterprise and service provider markets impact the performance monitoring landscape. And before I hand things over to today's featured speakers, I did want today's audience to know that you can log your questions throughout the course of the presentation by using the Q&A functionality located in the right-hand column of your screen. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow that will include the on-demand playback as well as some additional free resources. So be on the lookout for that email. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Shamus McGillicuddy. Shamus?
Thank you, Raleigh, and thank you for joining us today. So we will be looking at the maturity of an enterprise's IT infrastructure monitoring. And I will be talking about modeling that maturity along the lines of technology, process, and culture. And then I'm going to hand it off later to Scott Frymire from SevOne, who's going to dive deep into the technology pillar of infrastructure monitoring maturity. So EMA's perspective, Enterprise Management Associates' perspective on the topic of IT monitoring maturity is based on years of quantitative research and direct interaction with IT organizations among enterprises. And we've identified 3 pillars of IT maturity and IT monitoring maturity because an IT organization may be tied tightly to technology and the technologies they use to manage that infrastructure, but an IT organization is also all about its people and how they work. So we see 3 core elements in assessing any IT monitoring maturity model. First is the technology, as I've mentioned. What kinds of tools are you using to monitor your infrastructure? Are they isolated within specific silos in your IT organization? Are they integrated across domain in your IT organization? Are they integrated with non-monitoring tools such as your service desk? These are questions that you need to be thinking about. You also need to be thinking about processes. Specifically, how do you use these tools? And how do the people in your IT organization collaborate with these tools? Are they adversarial with each other? Are they collaborative, cooperative? And finally, culture, which is tightly coupled to processes, I believe. Here's where you think about how the IT organization views itself and how IT views the business. And conversely, how does business view IT? These cultural issues can affect how IT views its own mission in delivering services to the business it serves, and can also affect how business collaborates with the IT organization. We often hear about things such as shadow IT, which is a direct consequence of IT organizations culturally being detached from the business in some ways. So technology, process, and culture, they're all intertwined. And if you want to advance your maturity, your IT monitoring maturity, you want to be thinking about all 3 of these at once as you're going on your journey. So EMA's perspective is that there are generally 4 stages of IT monitoring maturity when you're looking at it from a technology, culture, and process perspective. Everyone has their own opinion on this, and everyone will have different stages that they think about. Scott will have a slightly different model that he will discuss when he's focused in on the technology aspects of this. But for from EMA's perspective, here are the 4 that we categorize. And basically it's a process of going from an IT organization that's a bunch of firefighters going out on calls to business leaders that are partners with the lines of business. The first stage we think of as reactive infrastructure management. The second stage is active operational management. The third stage is proactive service-oriented management, which is really the stage that I think most enterprises, IT organizations are trying to get to today. And then sort of more forward-thinking, looking out into the future, and maybe there are a few here already, the dynamic business-driven management approach. So, day-to-day crisis management is the rule for reactive infrastructure management organizations, the first stage that I discussed. Here you'll see monitoring tools that are element-centric, switch by switch, server by server, with some domain-level focus. IT buys monitoring tools usually in response to a crisis instead of making strategic investments on how to improve overall services. For instance, if the network management team had a tragic outage that could have been avoided with a specific tool, they're going to buy that specific tool. But there's usually no strategic thinking around how to manage the entire infrastructure end to end. We also hear this stage see processes that are focused on forwarding problems to specialists very quickly with no broad infrastructure diagnostics. This is an issue where someone gets a trouble ticket, they try to figure out exactly who the best engineer is to send that ticket to get it resolved. The only problem being that that engineer may only have a part of the problem within their scope of monitoring. The problem might lie somewhere in between how the network and the applications are interacting, or how storage and systems are interacting. And if you send this ticket to a specific engineer, a so-called hero in the systems engineering group, they may not have all the information at hand to solve the issue. It becomes much more inefficient. And this leads directly to a culture of individual heroes. These will be highly skilled engineers who are focused on troubleshooting. It's really their day-to-day job is fixing problems, even though they're very valuable individuals in terms of the skills that they possess. These might be like a CCIE, for instance. These engineers have siloed skill sets. They're usually a network engineer, a systems engineer, that they may not be interacting with their peers in the other domains within the IT infrastructure team. And these individual heroes in another organization might be innovating with their business. Instead of putting out fires, they might be building new services and applications and creating value for the business. But here they're just fixing problems. And as a result, IT has weak credibility, poor communication with the business, and are generally slow to fix problems. The second stage, active operational management, this is more of a service-centric management approach that emerges out of that firefighting mentality. Here, the organization has developed more of a service-level management approach that is more historical and forensic than real-time, which limits the ability to respond to issues. But they have some service-centric real-time monitoring on hand, which gives them some advantage. But most of the infrastructure monitoring is domain-centric rather than cross-domain-centric, which limits the ability to respond to issues end-to-end. Event handling does get more automated here, so you will see some fast resolutions of things, but still services are not yet well-defined and mapped to the infrastructure. This means that IT can restore core infrastructure operations quickly, but may be slow to restore business services that are enabled by that infrastructure. Also, IT in this stage works as a collection of skill groups, which is good, network, systems, storage, etc. But these silos, while they're developing common practices within, do not have a lot of cross-silo processes in place. So because the networking team, the systems team, the storage team, the security, etc., are generally isolated from each other and the rest of the business, there's still not quite the sense of everyone moving in the same direction. You still have those war rooms where everyone gets together and says, it's not me, It's not me. It's not, well, or more specifically, it's not us. It's not us. The third stage, here you're starting to see some organizations really start to get in to this stage of IT monitoring maturity, proactive service-oriented management. And here, IT is serving more as an internal service provider and monitoring its infrastructure in accordance with that. We've talked to a lot of enterprises that aspire to get to this stage, and some of them get there. Others are still working on it. Here, the management tools are chosen strategically rather than reactively, like the firefighting organization that we discussed earlier. And those monitoring tools are integrated with other operations and support systems. This enables better processes where monitoring tools provide cross-domain, service-centric views, and also visualization and analytics can capture and define the business impacts of IT, such as are outages impacting revenue generation? Is optimal performance boosting revenue generation, customer satisfaction, etc.? Workflows become more automated to capture best practices. We see an organization like Facebook, for instance, having, I believe the last time I heard from them, 99% of the trouble issues that come up in their data center operations are automatically resolved, or maybe it was 99%, automatically resolved by things that they call robots, which are basically very intelligent scripting tools that are integrated into your overall management system. Silos fade in the organization in favor of a total cross-domain infrastructure management team with interdependencies between the different domains in the infrastructure well understood. Our research has shown that there's a growing number of enterprises moving towards a cross-domain operations team. I think our most recent research indicated is about 40% of enterprises are moving towards this. A service organization emerges as a liaison to the business at this stage, empowered by strong monitoring, metrics, and strategic planning. The fourth stage, the nirvana, I suppose, of IT monitoring maturity is dynamic business-driven management. Here, the IT focuses on enabling the business, optimizing to shifting business conditions, and basically being a partner to the enterprise that it supports. The monitoring and operations tools at this stage are integrated to automate most day-to-day performance and availability performance problem resolution. As I mentioned, Facebook is basically at this stage. IT monitoring data provides insight into the business and not just the infrastructure. Advanced monitoring and management tools can shift resources automatically based on conditions and events. So you have less human interaction. The engineers that were once heroes are now focused on how to make the business successful instead of fixing problems and putting out fires. Both IT and business leaders now understand how IT can pull that off. And IT develops a common language for interacting with the business. It's important to be able to have somebody in the IT infrastructure team that can access the same monitoring data as the operations team, so that when there is an issue, the liaison to the business can look into the same tools and get access to the same insights that the monitoring that the operations team has, and be able to talk to the business about what the problem is, how they're going to fix it, when it's going to be fixed, and why they're going to be able to prevent it from happening again. So now that we've laid out the four stages of monitoring maturity, let's look at how to measure your progress in certain areas. There are many ways to understand how you're progressing, but here are about 5 ways to sort of characterize it. The first is the management tools, the technology that you buy from vendors such as SevOne to enable you to get insight into your infrastructure. You want to see a sort of steady progression along these lines, from element-centric to domain-centric to infrastructure-centric to focus on applications, business services, and business advantage. Your processes for event response. you should be moving away from heroes and firefighters that are putting out those fires and saving the day. Those processes should be replaced by automation, and the heroes should become domain experts who are earning their salaries by being focused on planning and optimization. The relationship between the operations center and the help desk should also be evolving. I haven't mentioned this yet, but you should be closing the technology and culture gaps between those two organizations, having process integration across those two groups. You should also have integrations between your service desk and your monitoring infrastructure to streamline workflows. In terms of asset management, you should be going from segregated domains to a total infrastructure view that's focused on performance. And when you get to that stage, then things like IT service chargebacks and accounting become possible if that is a goal of your organization, because that can actually help you demonstrate the value of IT. And finally, the relationship with the business. This allows you to transition from IT being perceived as a back office cost center that's slow to respond to change, slow to provide services that are and technologies that are as enjoyable to use as the consumer tools that so many of your clients are using these days. You see them bringing in iPhones, et cetera, et cetera. At that stage, when IT is viewed as a back office cost center, those people that populate the IT organization may look at clients as adversaries or idiots who are just messing things up. You want to evolve towards having a customer service focus and eventually have service liaisons emerge from organizations like the help desk and or network operations or some other group. And as I mentioned earlier, these people should be able to speak the language of the business, provide insight into what's happening with the infrastructure and when problems are occurring, but then also extend the conversation to having a focus on strategic service planning. Those people can also, when they're liaising, talk to the business about what they need next. Do they want to move to the cloud with a certain application? Do they want more mobility with a certain business process? If you have people face-to-face helping put out fires, sorry to use that word, we want to get away from that, helping them deliver services, you want them also understanding what service is needed next. That helps make your organization function better from end to end. And thank you very much. That's all I have for you today. I'm going to pass it now to Scott Frymire, who will take you through a more technology-focused look at maturity.
Great. Thank you, Shamus. I appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to be on the call with you today. My name is Scott Frymire. So I'm going to, as Shamus said, focus more on the technology aspect of a mature infrastructure monitoring approach, right? So certainly process, the culture, the people, that they are equally important, right? You could have the best technology in the world, but without the creative people behind it who are driving that technology, without the right processes in place to automate such things, you're not going to be very far along. So let me just take a step back for a second, because I have the I guess you would say privilege of being out on the trade show circuit from time to time. I was just at Cisco Live a couple of weeks ago in San Diego, in the U.S. here, and certainly been at other shows as well, and certainly other people at SevOne, my organization, get out all the time to the OpenStack Summit, the TM Forum Live, and other events. And it's a great opportunity to interface with people like yourself, IT professionals, both the enterprise and service provider market. And the one thing that just becomes readily apparent is that every organization is at a different stage of maturity, right? Now, sometimes that is tied to the size of the organization. I think there's a general belief that sometimes the larger the organization, the more sophisticated they become with their monitoring strategy and their capabilities. But I caution that's not always the case. I think a lot of it really does come down to the people that are driving that strategy and how creative they are. So, we thought, wouldn't it be great if from all these conversations we've had with people in the field and our own customers who are some of the largest enterprise and service providers in the world and have some of the most complex and demanding service environments, wouldn't it be great if we could somehow codify that progression of maturity. Okay, so we attempted to do that with what we're calling the maturity model for infrastructure monitoring. And you see it on the slide here. It's a 5-stage process, so maybe a little bit different than what Shamus was talking about in sort of a 4-stage evolution. It's a 5-stage process focused on sort of a best practice model for the functional capabilities, the technology behind your monitoring strategy. Okay, so it starts, let me just talk through this real briefly. It starts at level 1, which we call ad hoc monitoring. Now, you could probably also call this phase break it and fix it, because that's what's going on all the time, right? There's very little visibility over the entire IT infrastructure and the performance of that infrastructure. There is probably very little, if any, capacity forecasting being done effectively. Maybe you're looking at some top-end reports on most utilized resources, but there's very little of that. And it's, a lot of people in this phase are probably still tied to monitoring tools that were provided, I dare I say, thrown in by your hardware vendor when you've closed the deal, right? Just sweeten the pot a little bit. And there's a lot of disparate tools that aren't well integrated, and again, very little visibility. And even when you get up to level 2, which we call basic availability, you have a better handle on that availability, but you're still very much in that reactive firefighting mode that Shamus talked about earlier, right? And I would say customer churn, application and service delivery issues are the norm, and you are probably at this stage using a plethora of monitoring tools. Again, not well integrated. We've certainly talked to prospects and customers of ours, people in the market like yourselves, who may be using anywhere from a dozen to 24 or more monitoring tools, and that, of course, is sometimes within silos, sometimes from silo to silo. Everybody has their own favorites that they like to use, and it's just there is no single source of truth. Now, by the time you get up to level 3, which we call standardization and consolidation, now that is where you see organizations start to realize there's a great opportunity to standardize a lot of the, let's just say 80%, 85% of the monitoring function to a single platform. Now, at SevOne, we would never recommend that there's any silver bullet out there that's going to take care of all your monitoring needs. If anybody's found it, please give me a call. Find me online and let me know. I'd love to see it. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't exist. You're always going to have point solutions for very specific needs, whether it is, end user experience monitoring or deep packet inspection or whatever. There's always going to be somebody who specializes in something that you're going to want to partner with them. But 80% or more of the monitoring function can be consolidated onto a single platform that's very capable. And this is, once you do that, this is where you start to see the benefits of cost reduction. Okay, you're getting rid of a lot of overlapping maintenance contracts for these tools that essentially do the same thing in favor of a single platform. And then when you get on to level 4, advanced visibility, now some really interesting things are happening, because from a technology perspective, you're typically able to bring in any time series data you want, whether it's metric, flow, log data. You have it on a single platform from a single pane of glass. When you have advanced visibility in that stage, I think you're generally are at the point where you have very good service awareness and service definitions in place, right? There's been some sort of, you have the topologies, the service topologies and application topologies in place, whether they've been automatically discovered or you've built them yourself. And then when you get up to finally, what's the ultimate goal? It's that level 5, optimized service delivery. It's what we're all after. It's incredibly elusive, and probably the hardest jump to make, I would argue, is from level 4 to level 5. Very few level 5 organizations out there. We do see some of them in our own customer base, I think. They're doing some amazing things. But when you have optimized service delivery, you also have, let's just say, 99.9% plus visibility over your infrastructure at that point, right? I mean, even Shamus mentioned shadow IT. Even stuff that's shadow IT has kind of been drug out into the light. Nothing's getting below your radar. Let's just say 80% or more of potential service impacting events are actually detected prior to significant end user or customer impact. Okay, and you're getting into some really interesting things at level 5 with multivariate analytics and fine-tuning of that service delivery. So that's sort of the model we've put out there. And we have a lot of information behind it, but I just want to ask you guys. Now, I know I'm not going to expect anybody to text me or raise their hand, certainly, but you're probably already wondering to yourself, where do you fall on this maturity curve? I mean, think about that right now. If you haven't thought about it already, looking at this, where do you think you are on a level 1 through level 5 right now as an organization? Okay, now, I'm going to ask you this question. Do you think, is there anybody out there who started to think to themselves, you know what, it depends. Some aspects of our IT organization might be a level 3, but some might be a level 4 or a level 2. It really depends on what aspect of performance monitoring you're talking about. For example, somebody might be, let's just say, really good at troubleshooting. Okay, you've got your MTTR down. You feel like you've got a good handle on being able to troubleshoot and get to root cause, but your ability to accurately forecast future capacity needs might not be as far along. Okay, or maybe you're an organization who does a wonderful job at rolling up the performance metrics into an executive reporting view that makes sense to the executive team. It's actionable insight that they can make business decisions on. All right? You're very good at creating those dashboards and giving them the real-time information. But perhaps you, let's just say you don't have an environment that is highly interoperable or automated, right? You don't have those hooks yet between your performance monitoring platform and your service desk or ticketing system or your CMDB or whatever it may be, right? Or it could be possible that you have a great handle on service delivery, real-time status of service delivery, but you find out that you aren't on a monitoring platform that can scale much beyond what your current needs are today. So as you're creating more and more digital data, within your infrastructure, maybe you're moving into SDN, or you just have highly virtualized infrastructures, and all this massive loads of data are being created every minute, every second. Your ability to scale your monitoring needs with that infrastructure might be challenged, right? So I would say that's where most people are, right? They're not one exact number. Depending on what discipline of performance monitoring you look at, they might be in different areas. So what we've done with this maturity model, we have a white paper that we can share with you. I'll show you how you can get that at the end of this. But it goes into a deep dive across a number of different facets of monitoring, whether it talks about your visibility, your ability to troubleshoot, alerting, how you deploy your monitoring platform, your data collection. There's a number of different facets that need to be considered. And for each of those categories, you can see recommendations on how you can level up your game to the next level. All right? So let's just say from an alerting perspective, what we find is organizations who are on the lower end of the maturity curve are typically just alerting based off of threshold violations of statically defined upper limit thresholds, right? Something along the lines of, my CPU utilization has spiked beyond 95% for 15 minutes or more. Give me an alert, right? But when you look at more mature organizations, they're doing things like alerting based off of deviation from your current baseline performance. So the more mature organizations know that for this time of day and this day of the week, this is what the performance of any metric we collect or monitor should be. And if we see deviation, a trend, north or south of that, we want to be alerted, because it's really important for us to understand, not just when we hit a static threshold that we've defined in our own mind, we want to know when change is starting to occur in our environment that we need to know about, right? What is different right now that this wasn't happening an hour ago or a day ago? Because that's often where a lot of the problems arise, right? So you can really do a deep dive on this, but I want to say a couple things up front before we go any further. First, you may be saying, okay, SevOne, and guys, by the way, if you're not familiar with SevOne, we are a performance monitoring platform. What this maturity model is not. It is not something where the only way to get to level 5 is to buy SevOne, okay? Not why we're here today. We very much wanted to create a product-agnostic blueprint for how organizations can slowly step up their game from level 2, 3, 4, and on. And I think, Shamus, I thank him. In the past, he's actually contributed a quote for us that validates this, that validates what we're doing is a product-agnostic blueprint for achieving optimized service delivery via performance monitoring. Okay? In fact, I will say, if you go back to that model, when we go into the detail behind this about what's at level 5, there are things today that I admit SevOne cannot do for you at level 5. Okay? We have partners maybe you can work with. There are other companies doing some great things there. But, like I said, there is no silver bullet out there. So we freely admit that there are things that we don't do today, we'd like to be doing maybe, or there are things that we might never do, but there are other tools that you can connect and automate with that will help you do those things. Okay, so that's the first thing. I hope you see this as sort of a product-agnostic blueprint and something that you can use as a guidepost to get from level 1 to level 5. The other thing I want to point out is, again, when you see more of the detail behind this, you may agree with a lot of it. You may disagree with a few things. Okay, so let's just go back to the example on alerting. Where does alert suppression fall in as a functional capability? Is that a level 4 capability, a level 5, a level 3 capability? You may have different opinions on that, and a lot of the people we speak to do. That's not as important as understanding that, listen, this is a guidepost, okay? These are things that we've observed from our customers and others on what you can do to step up your game. I guess it's analogous to if you ask me directions, okay? I'm down in Philadelphia right now. Shamus, I believe, is up in Boston. If you ask me directions, Scott, how do I get from Philadelphia to Boston if I'm driving up there? Okay, well, you could pull out your Google Maps, and that'll give you one set of directions. You can go to your smartphone and look at your Waze app, and that's going to maybe take you another way, slightly different way. Or you could ask me, and I might take you even a slightly different way than that. It depends on what your needs and your goals are. Are you trying to, avoid the tolls, avoid the traffic, or take the scenic route? Either way, you're going to get there, and you're going to get there pretty quickly. But everybody might have a slightly different path on how they do that. Okay? So I did just want to point that out. Now, what I think we can all agree on is there are certain characteristics of a mature monitoring strategy that we see pretty much across the board. 4 characteristics. I want to share those with you, and we'll talk about it again from the technology perspective. And the first is, it is all about service assurance. Okay? The less mature organizations typically focus on individual component monitoring. Okay? What's the current state of that CPU or memory or disk? What's the traffic passing through a particular interface? Whatever it may be, whatever metric you're tracking, it tends to be at the lower levels of maturity, more component-based. When you get up to level 4 and on, people are looking at it from a service definition view. How is the service performing? So I can see there on the left, I have a quick executive dashboard, a status map of, how is Salesforce responding across my different business locations? How is SAP responding, or my VoIP, or whatever it may be, right? And a simple red, yellow, green indicator of that service status. And then also the ability, when you get down to the engineering level on the right here, looking at my SLAs, how many times my SLAs have I fallen outside of the agreement in the past 30 days, right? So how is that service performing? Very important. Okay, number 2, another trait that we find with more mature organizations. They typically have a much easier time handling the volume, variety, velocity of data that's typical of their infrastructure. Okay? They are getting things like metric and flow and log data in a single platform. They can get very granular with that data. They get that data very fast. Really, when you get up to level 4 again, you're probably you have the ability to bring in any time series data you want. If that data has a timestamp on it, you should be able to bring it in and graph it on a screen with any other metric in your platform. Okay, so we have customers that we've seen that are looking at things like football traffic through a certain part of their building or a terminal or something like that, football traffic, and how does that relate to the demand placed on their wireless network? Okay, or how do environmentals in the data center impact server performance? Okay, any time series data, being able to bring that in and correlate it. Okay, and especially with log data, and EMA has done some great research on this recently, log data being one of, if not the most demanded data types for performance monitoring and troubleshooting. How easily integrated that is it with your metrics, right? So if I'm looking at a graph, can I easily pivot off of an SNMP graph and go right into the relevant log data? Okay, so more mature organizations tend to be able to handle that volume, variety, velocity of data more easily from a single platform. Of course, they also tend to have higher levels of interoperability and automation, right? So we have a customer today who, when they add a new device or CMDB, automatically it's going to provision the monitoring capability, among other things, but the monitoring capability for that device as well. So that is automated. Or, how well automated today is your performance monitoring platform with the security side or with the service management side? Are you tied into things like ServiceNow? Or do you work with other orchestration tools, or maybe Puppet or Chef or Ansible? How have you helped orchestrate and automate performance monitoring into your process so that I guess the ultimate right would be, what I'm showing you right now on the screen, we have not yet seen with any of our customers. I'll be clear about that, but I think this is absolutely where everybody wants to go. When you talk about things like software-defined networking, okay, where does performance monitoring fit into that life cycle? How do you make it part of that ecosystem, right? So not only are you monitoring in an SDN environment, are you monitoring the controller and all the other aspects of your data center, but you're also getting topologies, real-time topologies and changes off the controller, but the performance monitoring platform actually then feeding recommendations back to the controller on how to optimize your application service delivery and optimize that SDN environment. I think that is the ultimate goal where we all want to go, and the more mature organizations are probably going to be on the forefront of leading that charge. And then finally, I think from a maturity model, the last aspect of a more mature strategy is the ability to better correlate and tie business performance to financial impact or to business impact. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the lesser mature organizations, and I don't mean to say that negatively, I'm just saying when you look at some of the organizations out there, they do have an idea of, okay, if we have downtime, it's costing our business this much money. Okay, or if we miss our SLAs, this is how much per violation that we get penalized. Right? So they tend to have a good grasp on that. But the really mature organizations, I think, look at it not only from a bottom line but also top line perspective. How can we use performance monitoring to actually grow revenue and to reduce waste? Not just to avoid penalties or lost revenue because we're down, but how can we use performance monitoring more proactively? So, for example, a customer of ours who is currently monitoring intelligent PDUs in their data center, right? The energy draw from these IP-enabled power strips that are connected to the servers in their data center, and how can they monitor the energy consumption and determine, okay, are there certain server candidates that maybe we need to virtualize, or what steps can we take to reduce our energy footprint and therefore, save money and not have to build additional data center space out, right? Or, let's see, what else? I mean, certainly in the service provider space, where the network is the business, it's much easier to take this approach, right, of more proactive creating revenue from performance monitoring. But that doesn't mean that in the enterprise space, we can't be thinking about that the same way. We absolutely can. And it really, again, it comes back to the people concept, where if you're hiring the right people and they're thinking about it in creative ways. I talked to a customer of ours, it was a few weeks ago now, and he said, Scott, you know what, I don't hire people that are great administrators to sit and pound away at a keyboard all day. Okay? I hire them for their creativity. Simple as that. I want them to have a really good understanding of how they can apply the technology we have to increase the business impact. So I think that's how more mature organizations typically approach it. So again, coming back to the model here for a second. Let's think again. Where do you think you fall from a level 1 to a level 5, having seen that, right? Now, better yet, what if I can show you a way where you can find out? So we went out and built an online assessment that you can take. It's 15 multiple choice questions. I'm going to share the link with you in just a minute. There's no personal data collected here whatsoever. You don't even have to put in an email address. It's completely anonymous. 15 multiple choice questions. And it'll ask you a number of questions that will help give us an idea of where your level of maturity is. And then at the end of that, you're going to see a graph pop up, and it's going to show you you're somewhere around between level 1 and 2 or level 3 and 4. Or, hey, if you're level 5, I'd love to meet you and talk to you, because I'm sure you're doing some fantastic things. When you get that results page, at the bottom of that results page, there's a link to download a white paper, and that white paper has all the information I talked about that does the deep dive on all the different facets of performance monitoring, the technologies involved, and how you can, best practices and tips for how you can move from level 1 or 2 or up, right? Nobody's going to make the jump. If you're at a level 2 now, nobody's going to expect you to be at a level 4 tomorrow. It's an evolutionary process. It's a step-by-step process, but I think there's some really good practical advice that we've got from our customers that will show you how you can level up your game. So for that, I should mention real quick, this is some of the early results we've seen from the online assessment. Again, we don't have individual results. These are just the aggregate results. And I think they're interesting. There's a few things here. 78% of the people who have taken the assessment up to this point have no service definition or awareness whatsoever. They're still focused more on a component monitoring strategy. That is a miss, right? That's the biggest miss out there. We have to get more people thinking about the service context. And then 81% have not integrated their monitoring tools with any other systems for automating processes. So think of the opportunity for both, for OpEx reduction in that regard, right? When you can start automating and cutting costs and then reinvesting that into the business. 64% say correlation of data is nearly impossible because reports span multiple tools. We see that all the time, right? So a good solid two-thirds of the respondents are probably somewhere around the level 2 maturity, where they're still using a plethora of disparate tools. And that's, from a cultural perspective, that's hard to break, right? It's very hard to go to one silo of the business or the other and say, hey, listen, we really need to start looking at standardizing on a single tool set for the majority of our function. And that's when that cultural attention comes into play. So here's the link, okay? So if you guys want to go out, info.sevone.com/maturity model. I think we'll leave that up there for a little bit. You can go ahead and take the online assessment. I don't think it would take you more than 10 minutes. Again, it's 15 multiple choice questions, a little bit of reading, but please take that. I think it's a great tool for you to work with other people across the IT enterprise, or the enterprise IT organization, or your service provider organization, and answer those questions together. They might be interesting. You might have different people in different parts of the IT organization who answer the questions differently, and therefore you get graded at a different level depending on who's actually answering the question. But I think you'll get some really good information, and again, at the end of that is a chance to download the white paper that really does the deep dive on the details behind the maturity model. So I hope that serves as a good guidepost for you guys. Certainly, at SevOne, we do infrastructure monitoring. We believe we have a fantastic solution that can help you level up your game from one level to the next, and some very smart people here that can talk to you about ways to do that. And I know certainly at EMA, they're a great resource for you as well. So I wish you guys the best. I'm going to turn it back to, I guess, Riley. Maybe we can open up for a little Q&A at this point.
Yes. Thanks, Scott. If you have any questions, you can log those now using the Q&A functionality. We've already received a few questions. So, Scott, I'm going to start with you. The first one is, what is the data source used for service-centric views?
Good question. So I think, it depends. It's usually multiple data sources. I'm not sure if there's one data source, but, very often people might be running IPSLA tests across a defined service, or some other synthetic test from an end-user experience monitoring that's going to tell you from the end-user perspective if everything is performing as expected, or if there's been any degradation or availability issues. But then, it really is that capability of a more mature organization to have all the supporting data below that to understand then, okay, once I know service has been impacted to some degree, how can I quickly get at the root cause? And it's a combination of looking at metric and flow and log data from a number of different sources. So you don't just understand that something happened, but you know who was impacted, who the top talkers were, and then potentially the logs may even have information about, what was the root cause of that performance issue.
Great. Thank you, Scott. For the next question, I'll jump over to you, Shamus. For business-driven management, does that require big data analytics using different data sources such as CRM, performance monitoring, security, etc.?
Not necessarily. As Scott just said, there are multiple sources of data that you want to be using. If you have a monitoring tool that has good visibility into layer 7, for instance, performance monitoring tool has good visibility into layer 7, like application layer, you can get some business-driven insights strictly from that. For instance, if you have a monitoring tool that can do some can read and interpret health level 7 standards, for instance, which are common standards for healthcare for software applications in the healthcare industry for communicating with each other. There are some monitoring tools that can read that and correlate it with network performance and give you a sense of how your infrastructure is supporting healthcare applications. But yeah, big data is obviously a really good tool. If you have a big data project in your environment, that's something you might want to leverage. I'm doing research about that right now, actually writing a report right now about how IT organizations are collecting various types of IT infrastructure monitoring data into big data environments, applying analytics to it, and in what kind of processes they use, what kind of processes are supported by that analytics. Are they improving their overall availability and performance of networks or servers or storage? When you're getting a lot of data in there that's correlating what's happening with all of your infrastructure, big data is, the whole dream of big data is to find unexpected insights by correlating multiple structured or unstructured or partially unstructured data types and finding things in that insight that can help you with your business-driven monitoring approach. Scott mentioned the value of timestamped data. I mean, if you have timestamped data from across your enterprise and put all of it into a big data environment, you're going to find all kinds of insights that can really drive your operation forward.
Yeah, and Shamus, if I could just piggyback on top of that, I think what's really interesting to me right now is as we're sort of on the verge of moving towards this, Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, depending on what vendor you're talking to, what they call it. But IoT, you're dealing now with these different sensors and maybe devices or applications that are coming into your environment, whether it's in your data center or just within the walls of your enterprise, that things that you might not consider IT, but they very well may have great sources of data that when you bring that data, that IoT data in and align it with your infrastructure data, from your applications, your networks, your servers, storage, whatever it may be, again, that ability to bring any sort of time series data into one place, graph it on the same screen, and look for correlation is pretty powerful from a business management perspective, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Thank you both for your insight on that. Scott, a question came in regarding the SevOne maturity model. Specifically, how did you come up with this model, and who did you speak with?
Good question. We spoke with a lot of people. First and foremost, our friends at EMA, Shamus and some other analysts there, other analysts outside of EMA, of course. We've spoken with a lot of you, whether it's, again, at trade shows or our customers. SevOne SevOne has a strong focus on Global 2000 enterprises and top-tier service providers, and there are some amazing customers of ours out there that I think are doing some fantastic things. We're with 8 of the top 13 global investment banks. We are with a number of top pharma companies in the world. We're with people like Verizon Wireless and Comcast. So we've had the opportunity to interface with some incredibly bright people and try to aggregate all their different, because everybody's going to have a slightly different view, but can we aggregate it and normalize it and try to come up with something that represents what we believe that maturity curve is. So and certainly working with our own smart people within SevOne as well.
Great.
Thank you for that question.
Another question for you, Scott, is you mentioned integration of metrics and logs. Can you explain more about what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I apologize, I'm going to do this from the SevOne perspective, but I think the way that SevOne looks at the integration of metrics and log analytics is a bit different than what you may be used to now. And let's just say the name Splunk, because if you're doing log analytics today, I'm sure a lot of you are at least familiar with Splunk or have Splunk. Certainly a lot of our customers do. It's a fantastic tool, but it's a little bit different than what SevOne offers. With Splunk, I think you're dealing with a tool that's very much geared towards post-event forensic analysis. Okay, so something has already happened, and now you're trying to find the needle in the haystack. What may have caused that? With SevOne, we take a slightly different approach. Actually, I should say, in some respect, a fundamentally different approach, which is we want to not have to have, you don't want to have to know what to go look for. We want to tell you what you should be looking at with the log data. So we collect the log data, baseline it, and trend it up front at the point of ingestion so that we can actually detect if there's a positive or negative trend with log data. Let's just say the number of failed user logins for a particular application starts to spike, and that's not normal for this time of day. We're going to give you an alert. The other thing we can do is if suddenly, think of a good example, just say that suddenly the amount of traffic that's passing through your firewall or a router has suddenly dropped off, and that's not normal for this time of day, right? Typically, in your performance monitoring platform, you get an alert, and you see maybe the SNMP graph or something, and you see that everything's dropped off. Well, what caused that? Being able to highlight that drop-off on your SNMP graph, and with a single click, bring up the related log files. So now you're seeing, you didn't have to go out and manually search anything. Literally, within a second or two, you see all the logs related to that incident because the system knows, it understands the context and the devices involved and the time frames involved. So with a single click, you pivot over to the logs in the same platform and you say, oh, somebody, John just made a configuration change, and obviously that looks like when the issue started happening, and maybe we need to go back and look at what he did to the system because it's negatively impacted the traffic that can pass through this particular device. So I hope that answers your question. So from a log metric to log analytics, I think that is a powerful, it can be a powerful troubleshooting tool, a more proactive way of getting ahead of service events, the service impacting events, and can even be used for capacity forecasts in certain manners. So I would love to talk to you further about that if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Now, Shamus, going back over to you, there are a couple of questions regarding culture, and here's kind of a big question, if you will. How can an IT organization improve its relationship with business leaders? What advice do you have?
Okay, I went over it a little bit in the presentation. You need to have someone who's conversing with the business from IT. You can't have the IT organization sort of living in a bubble. So, for instance, we did some research earlier this year that kind of looked at shadow IT adoption and how an IT organization becomes aware of it. And there are lots of technology things that can go on. There might be a security breach that you trace to shadow IT, or you might just pick it up in general network monitoring. You'll see traffic that indicates something like a new software as a service application is getting broadly used. But one of the most frequent ways that we saw enterprise IT organizations discovering shadow IT activity was general human-to-human interaction. And another one that was really frequent was requests for support. Now, you don't want to get a request for support for shadow IT because that means you're already really far behind. But general human-human interaction means that someone in IT had a conversation with somebody inside the lines of business that revealed that, for instance, the internal CRM application that has supported the business for 10 years is no longer in use by a certain sales force because they found that SaaS application was was much more agile for their needs in terms of, we wanted to be more mobile, and the internal CRM application just wasn't doing it for us, and we didn't know who to talk to about that, so we went and just bought subscribed to Salesforce.com. So conversations. Now that means that you need to have people. You may want to have people within the IT organization interacting with certain business leaders or certain project managers more often. It doesn't necessarily have to be a CIO level person either. It can be somebody who has a lot of domain experience that's relevant and impactful to certain business services. I mean, for instance, if there was some sort of catastrophic incident that really caused a problem for some division in some business unit, maybe you want to take somebody who's a true domain expert in that area that was responsible for the failure, and just put them in front of certain people in that business unit and talk about what went wrong and what you're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And just that conversations where people get to know each other and understand what matters to to one another can really sort of push a cultural change and create relationships between the two groups.
Thanks, Shamus, for that insight. We are almost at the top of the hour, so I'm going to conclude the Q&A portion. I wanted to thank the audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us. You will be receiving a follow-up email from EMA tomorrow, and it will include the playback, and I'll also provide the link for the SevOne maturity model if you're interested in delving into that further. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.